October 15, 2023. Heinz Field, Pittsburgh. Marcus Henderson watched 20,000 screaming fans surge toward the stadium gates like a human avalanche. He'd seen riots before. This wasn't one. The woman leading the charge carried a photograph above her head, a picture Mac recognized instantly. Emily Chen, dead 16 years, the case that ended his career. Sarah Chen's voice cut through the chaos over a bullhorn. Marcus Henderson covered up my mother's murder. The crowd roared. Security guards scattered. Mac's blood turned to ice. He'd spent 8 years believing Emily Chen's daughter had vanished into witness protection. But Sarah Chen had never disappeared. She'd been planning, waiting, building an army. The protest was never about justice. It was about revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mac's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, muscle memory kicking in from his decades in security. Speed dial 3, Pittsburgh PD. His finger hovered over the screen as Sarah Chen's amplified voice echoed across the stadium parking lot. 16 years ago, this man buried evidence. He let a killer walk free. The crowd's energy shifted, becoming something darker, more focused. Mac had orchestrated evacuations for bomb threats and crowd control for playoff riots, but this felt different, personal. 20,000 people weren't here for their team, they were here for him. He pocketed the phone. Calling the cops would only validate Sarah's accusations. Every reporter with a camera would capture Marcus Henderson, former NFL security chief, hiding behind police protection while a grieving daughter demanded answers about her mother's death. The smart play was retreat. His Jeep sat 3 rows back, engine running. Another old habit from his league days. Always have an exit strategy. But as he took his first step backward, Sarah's voice cut through the chaos again. Emily Chen was beaten to death in 2007. The police said it was random violence. They lied. Mac froze. She knew more than she should. The official report listed Emily's death as a mugging gone wrong. Case closed, no suspects. File buried in the basement of Zone 3 headquarters. He'd made sure of that himself. The crowd pressed closer to the stadium's outer perimeter, but security guards weren't pushing back. They were backing away. Some removing their radios, others simply walking off their posts. Mac's trained eye caught the tells immediately. Too many protesters knew exactly where to apply pressure, which choke points to target, how to move as a coordinated unit. This wasn't spontaneous outrage. This was a military operation disguised as civil unrest. Sarah Chen stood on the back of a pickup truck now, close enough that Mac could see her face clearly for the first time in 16 years. She'd been 12 when her mother died, a scared kid with pigtails who'd answered his questions in whispered monosyllables. The woman with the bullhorn bore no resemblance to that broken child. Sharp cheekbones, calculating eyes, and something else that made Mac's stomach clench with recognition. She had her mother's smile. Henderson destroyed evidence. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion, but her movements remained controlled. He took money to protect a killer. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Mac had never taken money, not directly, but the truth was worse than bribery. He'd covered up Emily Chen's murder because Tony Romano asked him to. Because saying no to Tony Romano meant career suicide, and Mac had bills to pay, a pension to protect, a reputation to maintain. He'd told himself the case was unsolvable anyway. Emily Chen had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The stadium security footage showing linebacker Derek Williams leaving the parking garage at 11:47 p.m., 3 minutes after Emily's death, was circumstantial at best. The blood on Williams's jersey could have come from the game. The witness statement placing him near Emily's car was from a homeless man who'd been drinking. Reasonable doubt. That's what Mac had called it when he buried the file. But Sarah Chen's presence here, leading this coordinated assault on Heinz Field, suggested she'd found something more than reasonable doubt. The crowd began chanting his name now. Henderson, Henderson, not cheering, demanding. Mac scanned the faces, looking for the usual signs of mob mentality, random anger, confused purpose, scattered leadership. Instead, he saw organization, hand signals between section leaders, coordinated timing as groups moved to surround the stadium, professional-grade communication equipment. Someone had trained these people. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, but the message made his blood freeze. "Turn around, Mac." Mac spun, searching the parking lot behind him. Empty cars stretched for 50 yards in every direction, but movement caught his eye. A figure stepped out from behind a white van, a man Mac hadn't seen in 8 years but would recognize anywhere. Detective Ray Kowalski, the cop who'd originally investigated Emily Chen's murder, the one Mac had convinced to let the case go cold. Ray looked older, grayer, but his expression hadn't changed since their last conversation. Pure hatred mixed with something else Mac couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or desperation. Ray raised his hand, and Mac saw the gun. "She found us all, Mac," Ray called out, his voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. "Every last one of us." The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. Sarah Chen hadn't just spent 16 years planning revenge against Marcus Henderson. She'd been hunting everyone connected to her mother's death. And if Ray Kowalski was here, pointing a gun instead of showing a badge, it meant Sarah had found leverage that could destroy them all. Mac's phone buzzed again. "Same unknown number. The protest is just the beginning. Tonight, everyone pays. Tomorrow's episode is going to change everything. I mean it. What happens next will completely flip your understanding of who the real villain is in this story. Don't miss it. Hit subscribe now because you won't want to miss a single revelation as this conspiracy unravels." Time slowed to the rhythm of Mac's heartbeat as he stared down the barrel of Ray Kowalski's service weapon. The acrid smell of car exhaust mixed with the distant aroma of stadium hot dogs, creating a cocktail of normalcy that felt obscene given the circumstances. This was supposed to be just another Sunday. Mac had planned to watch the game from his apartment, nurse a beer, maybe call his daughter in Seattle. Instead, his past had cornered him in a parking lot while 20,000 people chanted his name like a death sentence. "Put the gun down, Ray." Mac kept his voice steady, drawing on years of crisis management training. "We can figure this out." Ray's laugh was bitter as winter wind off the Allegheny. "Figure it out? She's got everything, Mac. Photos, recordings, bank records. 8 years I've been looking over my shoulder, waiting for this day." The weight of Ray's words settled like lead in Mac's stomach. 8 years. The same amount of time Mac had been running Henderson investigations, trying to build something clean from the wreckage of his reputation. 8 years of taking insurance fraud cases and cheating spouse surveillance, telling himself he was doing honest work now. 8 years of lying to himself that Emily Chen's ghost had finally stopped haunting his sleep. "What does she have?" Mac asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "Everything we thought we buried." Ray's hand trembled slightly. The real witness statements, the blood evidence Williams's lawyer made disappear, the money trail from Romano's people to the coroner's office. Mac's mouth went dry. He'd known about Williams and Romano, but the coroner? How deep had the corruption run? How many people had Emily Chen's murder touched? "My granddaughter starts first grade tomorrow," Ray said suddenly, his voice cracking. "You know what happens to cops in prison, Mac? You know what happens to their families when the mob finds out you've been talking?" The mention of family hit Mac like a physical blow. His own daughter, Jessica, worked for a tech company in Seattle, building the life Mac had always wanted for her. Clean, honest, removed from his mistakes. She called every Sunday at 7 p.m., religious about it, sharing stories about her job, her boyfriend, her plans to visit at Christmas. Jessica thought her father was a hero who'd left the NFL to start his own business. She had no idea her college tuition had been paid with blood money, that her childhood stability had been built on a foundation of buried truth. If Sarah Chen could destroy Ray Kowalski, she could destroy Mac too. And if Mac went down, Jessica would learn exactly what kind of man her father really was. "She won't hurt your family," Mac said, though he had no idea if that was true. "This is about us, not them." "Is it?" Ray gestured toward the stadium, where Sarah's voice continued to echo over the crowd. "Look around, Mac. This isn't just about Emily Chen anymore. This is bigger." Mac forced himself to really listen to Sarah's speech for the first time. She wasn't just talking about her mother now. She was connecting Emily's death to a pattern, other suspicious cases, other buried investigations, other families who'd never gotten justice. And Emily Chen was just the beginning. Sarah's amplified voice carried across the parking lot. For 16 years, this network has operated with impunity, covering up crimes, protecting killers, destroying evidence, all in the name of protecting Pittsburgh's most beloved institution. The crowd's response was visceral, angry, hungry for blood. But Mac noticed something else now: media vans arriving at the perimeter. This wasn't just a protest. Sarah Chen was broadcasting her accusations to the world. "She's been planning this for years," Ray said, lowering his gun slightly. "Building cases, collecting evidence, finding all of us." Mac's phone buzzed again. This time it was Jessica's name on the screen, her Sunday call right on schedule. For a moment, he considered answering, hearing her voice one more time before his world collapsed completely. But the phone went silent, and the moment passed. "What do you want from me, Ray?" Mac asked. "Help me figure out how to survive this." Ray's desperation was naked now, raw as an open wound. "You were the fixer. You were the one who made problems disappear. Make this disappear." But even as Ray spoke, Mac knew it was too late. Sarah Chen had spent 16 years building toward this moment. She'd orchestrated a military precision operation that had trapped them in plain sight of thousands of witnesses and dozens of cameras. Whatever evidence she possessed, whatever leverage she'd accumulated, it was about to go public in the most spectacular way possible. Mac thought about Jessica's laugh, about the pride in her voice when she talked about her father, about the quiet life he'd built, the small redemptions he'd found in helping people find lost pets and cheating spouses. All of it was about to burn. "I can't make this disappear," Mac said finally. "But maybe we can control how it ends." Ray's eyes went wide with understanding just as Sarah Chen's voice rose to a crescendo behind them. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Ray's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and something approaching relief. But before either man could speak, Mac's phone erupted with a sound that made his blood turn to ice. The specific ringtone he'd assigned to only one contact 8 years ago and had never changed. Tony Romano. Mac stared at the screen, his mind reeling. Tony hadn't called since 2015, the night Mac had officially left the league and cut all ties to his former life. The phone kept ringing, its insistent melody cutting through the distant roar of Sarah's protest like a blade through silk. "Answer it," Ray whispered, his gun still trained on Mac but forgotten now. "Answer it, and put it on speaker." Mac's finger trembled as he swiped to accept. "Tony." "Mac, my boy." The voice was exactly as Mac remembered, smooth as aged whiskey, carrying the hint of an accent Tony had never quite shed. "Beautiful day for a protest, wouldn't you say?" The casual tone sent ice through Mac's veins. "You're watching this?" "Oh, I'm doing more than watching." Tony's laugh was soft, almost paternal. "Did you really think I'd let little Sarah Chen destroy 40 years of careful business arrangements? Did you think I'd forgotten about you, Mac? About what you know?" Ray's face had gone white. He mouthed the words "he's here" and began scanning the parking lot with wild eyes. "Here's what's going to happen," Tony continued, his voice taking on the edge Mac remembered from their worst negotiations. "You're going to walk to Section C, row 15. You're going to find the white envelope taped under seat 247. And then, you're going to make a choice about how this day ends." "Tony, I don't—" "The envelope contains photographs, Mac. Very interesting photographs of your daughter Jessica leaving her apartment in Seattle this morning. Lovely girl. Looks just like her mother, God rest her soul." The world tilted. Mac's knees nearly buckled as the implication hit him like a physical blow. Tony Romano had found Jessica, had people watching her. After 8 years of careful distance, of building walls between his old life and his family, Tony had reached across the country and put Mac's daughter in the crosshairs. "You son of a bitch," Mac whispered. "Language, Mac. We're old friends." Tony's voice carried a smile. The photographs also contain an address, a warehouse on the north side where young Derek Williams has been staying since his early release from prison last month. Yes, that's right. The linebacker who killed Emily Chen has been back in Pittsburgh for 3 weeks. Sarah doesn't know that yet, but she will soon. Mac's mind raced. Derek Williams was supposed to be serving 15 years for vehicular manslaughter, A different case, a different victim, but the only justice Emily Chen's family had ever seen. If he was out early, if Tony had orchestrated his release. Williams wants to make amends, Tony continued. Conscience has been eating at him, apparently. Prison religion, you know how it is. He's prepared to confess everything about the night Emily Chen died. Unless, of course, someone convinces him that confession might not be in his best interests. The pieces of Tony's plan crystallized with horrible clarity. He wanted Mac to get to Williams before Sarah did, to silence the only witness who could corroborate her accusations, to become complicit in another cover-up, binding Mac to Tony's organization forever. I won't do it, Mac said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jessica's face flashed in his mind, her smile during their last video call, her excitement about a promotion at work, her plans to visit for Christmas. Won't you? Tony's voice was soft, almost gentle. Sarah Chen has spent 16 years planning her revenge, Mac, but she made one critical mistake. She assumed you were the monster in this story. She doesn't know about our history, about the choices you made to protect the people you love. When she realizes that destroying you means destroying an innocent girl who's never done anything wrong, well, that might complicate her moral certainty. Ray was frantically gesturing, pointing toward the stadium entrance where Mac could now see additional figures moving through the crowd, men in casual clothes who moved with the controlled purpose of professional security. Tony's people, taking positions. The envelope, Mac. Section C, row 15, seat 247. You have 20 minutes before Williams decides to walk into that protest and confess everything on live television. Your choice, save your daughter and become the man Sarah thinks you are, or stay pure and watch everything you love burn. The line went dead. Mac stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, as the weight of Tony Romano's trap settled around him like a noose. For 8 years he'd believed his past was buried. Instead, it had been lying dormant, waiting for the perfect moment to rise and reclaim him. Ray lowered his gun completely. Jesus Christ, Mac, he's got your daughter. Behind them, Sarah Chen's voice continued to rise, calling for justice, demanding truth. But Mac could no longer hear her words over the thundering of his own heartbeat, and the terrible arithmetic of Tony Romano's ultimatum, Jessica's life against Derek Williams's conscience. His daughter's safety against whatever remained of his soul. The past hadn't just returned, it had brought reinforcements. Mac's hands shook as he stared at his phone's dark screen, Tony Romano's words echoing like gunshots in his skull. 20 minutes. The number burned behind his eyes as he tried to process the impossible calculus of the choice before him. Around them, the protest's roar had shifted, growing more organized, more dangerous. We need to move, Ray said, but his voice sounded distant, filtered through the white noise of Mac's panic. Mac, we need to... Shut up! Mac's voice came out harsher than intended. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to think past the terror clawing at his chest. Jessica was 3,000 miles away. Tony's people were fast, but they weren't magic. There had to be time to warn her, to get her somewhere safe. He dialed her number with trembling fingers. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. The realization hit like ice water. Tony hadn't just found Jessica. He'd already moved on her. Try to stay safe and fail, Mac muttered. Tony's words from years ago surfacing unbidden. It had been Romano's favorite phrase during their NFL days. His explanation for why good people always ended up compromising, why moral stands were luxuries only the powerless could afford. Mac's second phone, the clean one he used for business, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, revealing Jessica sitting in what looked like a coffee shop, unaware that someone across the room was photographing her. The timestamp showed 30 minutes ago. Seattle time. The message that followed was simple. She's safe for now. Your move. Mac Ray's voice carried a new urgency. Look at the stadium. Mac forced himself to focus. The crowd had shifted formation again, no longer pressing against the main entrance. Instead, they were flowing toward the player parking area, exactly where Derek Williams would emerge if he decided to make his confession public. Sarah Chen was repositioning her forces. and she had no idea she was walking into Tony Romano's trap. "She doesn't know," Mac said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "Know what?" "About Tony, about how deep this goes." Mac watched Sarah directing her protesters with military precision, her bullhorn catching the afternoon light. She thought she was the hunter, but she'd walked into a web that had been spinning for decades before her mother's death. She thinks this is about justice. She has no idea she's about to start a war. The weight of old relationships pressed down on Mac's shoulders like a lead blanket. 8 years ago, when he'd walked away from the NFL, he'd believed he was cutting ties cleanly. He'd paid his debts, kept his mouth shut, and disappeared into the anonymity of private investigation work. But Tony Romano didn't believe in clean breaks. Tony believed in leverage, in keeping people close enough to use when circumstances required it. Mac had been naive to think he'd ever truly escaped. "We could run," Ray said suddenly, "both of us. Just get in our cars and drive until we hit an ocean." But even as Ray spoke, they both knew it was impossible. Tony's reach extended far beyond Pittsburgh, and Sarah Chen's evidence would follow them anywhere. Mac thought about the storage unit in Lawrenceville, where he'd hidden his own insurance policy, copies of documents, recorded conversations, enough evidence to bring down half the city's power structure. He'd always told himself it was for protection, but he'd never found the courage to use it. Maybe because using it would have meant admitting what he really was. His phone buzzed again. Jessica's ringtone. "Dad?" Her voice was strained, confused. "There are some men here asking about you. They say they're with the FBI, but something feels wrong." Mac's vision grayed at the edges. "Where are you?" "At work. They came to my office." "Dad, what's going on?" "Federal agents. Tony's people wouldn't identify themselves as FBI unless they had badges that would pass close inspection, which meant Romano had corruption reaching into federal law enforcement. Or these were real agents working a case Mac didn't understand. Either possibility meant Jessica was in immediate danger. "Listen to me very carefully," Mac said, moving away from Ray, lowering his voice. "Do not go anywhere with them. Find a public space, stay around other people, and call 911 if they try to force you to leave." "Dad, you're scaring me." "I know, baby, I know. Just trust me on this. Can you do that?" "Yes." Her voice was smaller now, the tone she'd used as a child when she was frightened but trying to be brave. "I love you, Jess. Remember that, no matter what you hear about me in the next few hours." "Dad!" Mac ended the call before she could ask the questions he couldn't answer. Around him, the protest continued its deadly choreography, but he could no longer hear Sarah Chen's voice over the sound of his own heart breaking. 20 minutes had become 15. Time was running out, and every choice led to betrayal. Mac stood motionless in the chaos, his phone dead in his hand, paralyzed by the architecture of his own destruction. 15 minutes. The number carved itself deeper into his consciousness with each passing second, counting down to a choice that would define not just his own fate, but the lives of everyone caught in Tony Romano's web. He forced his legs to move, walking toward the stadium entrance while his mind churned through possibilities, each one leading to a darker conclusion. Ray followed at a distance, no longer pointing his gun but keeping it visible, a reminder that desperation had made enemies of former allies. The crowd parted around Mac like water around a stone. These weren't just angry football fans anymore. They were Sarah Chen's army, organized and purposeful, each one carrying the weight of 16 years of buried truth. Mac caught fragments of their conversations as he passed, mentions of Emily Chen, demands for justice, speculation about which officials would fall first. They had no idea they were standing in the kill zone of a war they didn't understand. Section C loomed ahead, its concrete columns casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. Mac's footsteps echoed as he climbed the stairs, muscle memory guiding him through corridors he'd walked countless times during his NFL security days. The irony wasn't lost on him, returning to the scene of his former power to collect the instrument of his current destruction. Row 15. The seats were empty, the section closed for maintenance. Mac's fingers found the envelope taped beneath seat 247, the adhesive still tacky, recently placed. Tony's efficiency remained as terrifying as Mac remembered. Inside, 3 photographs: Jessica leaving her Seattle apartment, Derek Williams emerging from what looked like a halfway house, and a wide shot of the protest with crosshairs drawn over Sarah Chen's position. The message was clear: Tony could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. A folded paper fell from the envelope, an address on the north side, along with a key and a handwritten note in Tony's distinctive script. "Williams is waiting. Convince him or bury him. Your choice. Clock starts now." Mac's hands trembled as the weight of Tony's expectations settled on his shoulders. For 8 years, he'd convinced himself that he'd paid his debt, that Emily Chen's death was a sin he could carry without spreading the contamination further. But Tony Romano understood something about corruption that Mac had never wanted to acknowledge. It wasn't a single act but a system, and everyone touched by it became part of its perpetuation. The warehouse address burned in Mac's memory as he descended back toward the parking lot. He could drive there now, find Williams, and make the problem disappear, permanently. It would save Jessica, protect his carefully constructed new life, and ensure that Sarah Chen's crusade died with her only living witness. All it would cost was whatever remained of his soul. Or he could walk away, let Williams confess, and watch as Tony Romano's vengeance consumed everyone Mac had ever cared about. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number, a video file, just 10 seconds long. Jessica, walking through her office building lobby, oblivious to the men in suits trailing her at a discreet distance. The timestamp was 3 minutes old. Mac's vision blurred with rage and helplessness. In the distance, he could hear Sarah Chen's voice growing more strident, building toward some climactic revelation. She was playing her endgame, unaware that Tony Romano was 3 moves ahead, that every word she spoke was being orchestrated by a man who'd turned manipulation into an art form. The terrible arithmetic of the situation crystallized in Mac's mind. Tony hadn't just trapped him, he'd trapped Sarah too. Her mother's killer was sitting in a warehouse, ready to confess, and the only thing standing between justice and continued cover-up was Mac's willingness to become a murderer. If he went to Williams, Sarah would lose her chance at truth. If he warned her, Jessica would pay the price. Ray appeared at his elbow, breathing hard from the climb. "Find what you were looking for?" Mac held up the photographs without speaking. Ray's face went ashen as he processed the implications. "Jesus Christ," Ray whispered. "He's not just covering this up, he's orchestrating it. The whole thing, Sarah's protest, Williams being released, your daughter, it's all connected." The realization hit Mac like a physical blow. Tony Romano hadn't been scrambling to contain Sarah Chen's investigation. He'd been guiding it, shaping it, turning her quest for justice into the perfect trap. Every move Sarah thought she was making independently had been anticipated, planned for, weaponized against itself. Mac's phone rang again, Jessica's number. This time, he answered on the first ring. "Dad?" Her voice was smaller now, frightened. "They're gone, but they left something for you. An address. They said you'd know what it means. The warehouse address." Tony was making sure Mac understood exactly how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered, how completely his daughter had been woven into the web. 12 minutes left, and Mac finally understood the true scope of his betrayal, not just of Emily Chen 16 years ago, but of everyone who would pay for his choices today. Mac stared at the warehouse address in Jessica's shaking voice, the final piece of Tony Romano's puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. But it wasn't just the address that made his blood run cold. It was the familiarity of it. He knew that building. He'd been there before, 16 years ago, the night Emily Chen died. "Ray," Mac said, his voice barely a whisper, "the warehouse address Jessica just gave me, I know it." Ray's face went pale. "What do you mean you know it?" Mac closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember the details he'd spent 8 years trying to forget. The emergency call from Tony Romano, the desperate drive across the city, the blood on Derek Williams's hands and the terror in his eyes as he begged Mac to make it all disappear. "That's where Tony had me take the car," Mac said. "Emily Chen's car, after the accident." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Ray stepped back involuntarily, his hand moving toward his gun again. "You told me you just falsified the report," Ray said. "You told me you never saw the body, never touched physical evidence." Mac's carefully constructed story, the one he'd told Ray, told himself, told his therapist during those dark months after leaving the NFL, began to crumble. He'd convinced himself that his role had been limited, bureaucratic, clean, a signature on a form, a file misfiled, a witness statement that disappeared into administrative limbo. But standing in the shadow of Heinz Field, with Tony Romano's trap closing around him, Mac could no longer maintain the lie. "I didn't just falsify the report," Mac said, each word feeling like ground glass in his throat. "I helped dispose of the evidence. The car, Emily's purse, her phone, everything that could have proven Derek was drunk, that could have shown premeditation." Ray's face went white. "Jesus Christ, Mac, you're not just a witness, you're an accessory." The admission felt like a dam breaking inside Mac's chest. For 8 years, he'd told himself he was guilty of cowardice, of bureaucratic corruption, of moral flexibility. But the truth was darker, more personal, more damning. He hadn't just enabled Tony Romano's cover-up, he'd been an active participant in destroying evidence of murder. "There's more," Mac said, the words coming faster now, as if confession might somehow absolve him. "Emily Chen wasn't killed in a random drunk driving accident. Derek Williams was specifically targeting her." Ray's gun was fully drawn now, though he wasn't pointing it directly at Mac yet. "Targeting her how?" "She was investigating gambling irregularities in the team's financial records, players taking payments to influence point spreads. Emily was an accountant for the league office. She'd stumbled onto Tony's operation." Mac's voice cracked as the full weight of his betrayal became clear. Tony ordered Derek to scare her, to make her back off. But Derek was high, paranoid. He didn't just intimidate her, he ran her down like an animal. The revelation recontextualized everything Mac thought he knew about that night. He'd believed he was covering up a tragic accident committed by a troubled athlete. Instead, he'd helped conceal a calculated murder designed to protect a criminal enterprise worth millions. "Sarah doesn't know," Mac continued. "She thinks her mother was a random victim. She has no idea Emily died because she was trying to expose the same corruption Sarah's been hunting." Ray's weapon was shaking now. "You let that girl spend 16 years believing her mother died for nothing. You let her blame herself for not being there, for not protecting Emily. And all this time you knew she died as a hero." Mac's phone buzzed with another message from Jessica, but he couldn't bring himself to read it. Every choice he'd made since Emily Chen's death had been built on the foundation of that original lie. His departure from the NFL, his careful distance from his family, his quiet life as a private investigator, all of it designed to protect not just Tony Romano's secret, but his own. "There's something else," Mac said, his voice barely audible above the growing roar of the protest. "Something I've never told anyone." Ray waited, his face a mask of disgust and betrayal. "Emily Chen called me that night," Mac said, "before Derek killed her. She'd figured out that someone in NFL security was feeding information to Tony's operation. She was going to expose everything, the gambling, the point shaving, the payments to players and officials. She asked me to meet her, to help her go public. And I told Tony about the call." The words came out in a rush, as if speed might diminish their impact. "I thought I was protecting the league, protecting jobs, protecting the game itself. I had no idea I was signing her death warrant." Ray's face went completely white. The gun in his hand stopped shaking as a terrible calm settled over him. "You didn't just cover up Emily Chen's murder," Ray said quietly. "You enabled it. You're the reason she's dead." In the distance, Sarah Chen's voice continued to call for justice, unaware that the man responsible for her mother's death was standing 50 yards away, finally understanding the true depth of his betrayal. The weight of Ray's words settled over Mac like a burial shroud. "You're the reason she's dead." The truth of it was undeniable now, stripped of 16 years of careful rationalization and self-deception. He hadn't just been a coward who chose institutional loyalty over justice. He'd been the instrument of Emily Chen's murder, as surely as if he'd been behind the wheel himself. "Mac." Ray's voice was steady now, the gun no longer trembling. "We need to end this. Today." Mac looked at his former partner, seeing not the man he'd worked beside for 5 years, but a stranger whose moral clarity had survived where Mac's had rotted away. Ray had spent 8 years believing he'd been working alongside someone who'd made a terrible mistake. Now he understood he'd been partnered with a killer. "You're going to that warehouse," Ray continued, "but not to silence Derek Williams. You're going to bring him here, to the protest, and you're going to let him tell the truth. All of it." Mac's phone buzzed again. This time, he forced himself to read the message from Jessica. "Dad, the FBI agents came back. They say they need to speak with you urgently about a federal investigation into organized crime." "I'm scared." The irony was savage. Real federal agents, probably building a case against Tony Romano's network, had found Jessica just as Tony's people were closing in. His daughter was caught between legitimate law enforcement and criminal vengeance, and Mac's choices had put her there. "I can't," Mac said, his voice breaking. "If I don't do what Tony wants, Jessica dies. If I do what he wants, Sarah never gets justice, and this corruption continues forever." Then we find a third option. Ray holstered his weapon, and Mac saw something shift in his expression. Not forgiveness, but tactical calculation. Tony Romano's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. He's got contingencies, backup plans, layers of protection. But he's made one mistake, which is, he assumes you're still the same man who sold out Emily Chen 16 years ago. Ray stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Are you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Mac thought about the 8 years he'd spent running his small investigation firm, helping people find missing relatives, exposing insurance fraud, collecting evidence of adultery and embezzlement. Small cases, small victories, but honest work. He'd told himself it was penance, but maybe it had been preparation, learning how to be the man he should have been from the beginning. "No," Mac said finally. "I'm not the same man." "Then prove it." Ray pulled out his own phone. "I'm calling Detective Morrison with Pittsburgh PD. She's been investigating Tony Romano's connections to city contracts for 2 years. If we give her Derek Williams and your testimony, she can build a federal case that protects Jessica and destroys Tony's operation." Mac's mind raced through the possibilities. It could work, if they moved fast enough, if Derek Williams was willing to cooperate, if Detective Morrison could coordinate with federal authorities before Tony realized his trap had been turned against him. But it would require Mac to surrender the last shreds of his carefully constructed life, to admit publicly to his role in Emily Chen's murder. In the distance, Sarah Chen's voice rose above the crowd. 16 years ago, my mother, Emily Chen, was murdered to protect a conspiracy of corruption that reaches from the NFL to the highest levels of this city's government. Today, we demand justice for her death and accountability for everyone who participated in the cover-up. She was so close to the truth, but she didn't know that the man most responsible for her loss was standing within earshot, finally ready to pay the price for his sins. "There's something else," Mac said, reaching into his jacket. "Something I've been keeping as insurance." He pulled out a small digital recorder, its LED display showing hundreds of hours of stored audio. "Every conversation I've had with Tony Romano for the past 5 years. Every threat, every instruction, every detail about how his operation works. I've been recording him since the day I realized I'd never really escaped." Ray stared at the device. "Why didn't you ever use it?" "Because using it would have meant admitting what I really was. What I really did." Mac looked toward the stadium, where Sarah Chen continued her passionate plea for justice. "But maybe it's time to stop protecting myself and start protecting the people who deserve better." His phone rang. Tony Romano's number. Mac showed the display to Ray, who nodded grimly. "Answer it," Ray said. "But remember, you're not the same man who took his orders 16 years ago." Mac accepted the call, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Jessica lived, whether Sarah got justice, and whether he could finally find a way to honor the memory of Emily Chen, the woman whose murder he'd enabled, whose death had haunted every day of his life since. The warehouse waited, Derek Williams waited, and somewhere in the city, Tony Romano's web of corruption was about to discover that its most reliable asset had become its greatest threat. Mac's thumb hovered over the answer button as Tony Romano's call rang out between him and Ray. The digital recorder felt solid and damning in his other hand, 5 years of evidence that could topple an empire built on corruption and murder. But first, He had to survive the next 5 minutes. "Tony," Mac answered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Mac, my friend." Tony's voice carried that familiar mix of warmth and menace that had terrified Mac for 16 years. "I trust you received my package. Beautiful day for a football game, isn't it?" Ray pressed close enough to hear both sides of the conversation, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "I got your message," Mac said, "but we need to talk about Jessica. She says FBI agents approached her." A pause. When Tony spoke again, the warmth was gone. "Real FBI, unfortunately. Someone's been feeding them information about our business arrangements. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Mac's blood chilled. Tony already suspected betrayal, which meant the margin for error had just evaporated. "I've kept our deal, Tony, for 8 years, exactly like we agreed. Deals change, Mac. Circumstances evolve. That little girl with the megaphone has stirred up more attention than I can manage through normal channels. Which brings us to our friend Derek Williams." In the background of Tony's call, Mac could hear the distant sound of Sarah Chen's voice echoing across the stadium plaza. Tony was close enough to be watching, close enough to act if Mac made the wrong choice. "The warehouse address," Mac said. "I know what you want me to do. Do you? Because I'm beginning to wonder if the Mac Henderson I hired 16 years ago still exists. The man who understood that some secrets are worth more than individual lives." Ray grabbed Mac's arm, shaking his head frantically. But Mac had already made his choice, the one he should have made the night Emily Chen called him for help. "You're right, Tony. That man doesn't exist anymore." The silence stretched long enough for Mac to count his own heartbeats. When Tony spoke again, his voice carried the chill of absolute judgment. "Then you've killed your daughter, Mac, and that idealistic little bitch with the microphone won't live to see the sun set. I gave you 8 years of peace. I let you play private investigator, let you pretend you were something other than my asset. But you belong to me. You've always belonged to me." Ray was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, calling Detective Morrison. But Mac knew Tony's people would be faster than any official response. They had minutes, maybe less. "There's something you need to know," Mac said, his voice carrying across the plaza as he began walking toward Sarah Chen's position. "About Emily Chen. About that night 16 years ago." Tony's breathing became audible through the phone. "You're making a mistake you can't undo, Mac. I made that mistake 16 years ago when I helped you cover up murder." Mac's voice was rising now, drawing attention from protesters and police alike. Emily Chen wasn't killed because Derek Williams was drunk and stupid. She was murdered because she discovered your point-shaving operation, your network of corrupted players and officials. Sarah Chen's amplified voice faltered as she turned toward the sound of Mac's confession. Their eyes met across 50 yards of crowd, and Mac saw the exact moment recognition dawned in her face, not just of his identity, but of his guilt. "Emily called me that night," Mac continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the plaza now. "She asked for my help exposing the corruption. Instead, I called you. I told you she was going to go public. I signed her death warrant." The crowd had gone completely silent. Sarah Chen stood frozen, her microphone lowered, staring at the man who had enabled her mother's murder. Ray appeared at Mac's side, gun drawn, scanning the crowd for Tony's people. "My name is Marcus Henderson," Mac said, his voice breaking. "I was chief of security for the Pittsburgh Steelers 16 years ago. I helped Tony Romano cover up Emily Chen's murder, and I've been protecting that secret ever since. But not anymore." His phone crackled with Tony's voice, no longer bothering with pretense. "Kill them all." The first shot came from somewhere in the crowd, aimed at Sarah Chen but missing as Ray tackled her to the ground. Chaos erupted as protesters scattered. Police drew weapons, and Mac found himself running not away from the violence, but toward it. Toward Sarah Chen, toward the woman whose mother he'd failed to protect. Derek Williams emerged from the crowd, older and haunted but very much alive, moving toward them with something that looked like relief on his face. Behind him, Mac could see Tony Romano's men closing in, their hands inside their jackets. The truth was finally free. Now all that remained was to see who would survive it. 3 hours later, Mac sat in a hospital waiting room, his hands finally steady after giving his statement to Detective Morrison for the 3rd time. The chaos at Heinz Field had ended with 7 arrests, 2 wounded civilians, and Tony Romano in federal custody. Derek Williams was in protective custody, his 16-year nightmare of fear and guilt finally over. But it was Sarah Chen's words that echoed in Mac's mind as he waited to hear about Jessica's condition. "I don't forgive you," she had said as the paramedics treated a graze on her arm from the gunfire. "But thank you for finally telling the truth." Detective Morrison appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Your daughter's fine. The agents with her were real FBI. They were actually protecting her when Tony's people showed up. She's asking for you." Mac found Jessica in a conference room down the hall, wrapped in an FBI windbreaker that dwarfed her small frame. When she looked up at him, he saw his own eyes staring back, the same gray-green that had watched him shave every morning for 58 years, but clearer somehow, unburdened by the weight he'd carried. "Dad," she said quietly, "I saw the news. I know what you did." Mac sat across from her, the institutional table between them feeling like an ocean. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, for all of it, for the danger I put you in, for the lies, for finally doing the right thing?" Jessica's voice carried a strength he'd never heard before. "Agent Martinez explained everything, about Mom's accident, about why you really left the NFL, about why you've been so careful all these years." She paused, studying his face. "You've been protecting us this whole time, haven't you?" The question broke something loose inside Mac's chest. "I was protecting myself. The family I was trying to keep safe was already destroyed the night I chose Tony Romano over Emily Chen. I just couldn't admit it." Jessica reached across the table, her fingers covering his weathered hands. "But you stopped him. Today, you stopped him." Through the conference room window, Mac could see news trucks lining the street, reporters broadcasting live updates about the corruption scandal that was already reaching into the highest levels of city government. Tony Romano's arrest had triggered a cascade of federal warrants. The mayor's office was under investigation. 3 current NFL players had been suspended pending review of their financial records. The door opened, and Sarah Chen entered, her arm in a sling but her expression resolute. She looked at Jessica, then at Mac, and something passed between them that felt like the beginning of understanding. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said to Jessica. "Your father's testimony is going to put away the people who killed my mother, all of them." Jessica squeezed Mac's hands tighter. "He's been carrying this guilt for 16 years. I think it almost killed him." "It should have," Sarah said bluntly, but without malice. "What he did was unforgivable. But what he did today—" She paused, searching for words. "Today he gave my mother back her story. For 16 years she's been remembered as a random victim. Now people will know she died fighting corruption, trying to protect the integrity of something she loved." Mac looked between the 2 women, his daughter and the daughter of the woman he'd failed, and realized that redemption wasn't something he could earn or deserve. It was something that had to be freely given, and even then, it came with permanent scars. "What happens now?" Jessica asked. Detective Morrison reappeared in the doorway. "Mr. Henderson will likely face federal charges for his role in the cover-up, but given his cooperation and the evidence he provided, the U.S. Attorney is prepared to recommend a plea agreement." Mac nodded, unsurprised. He'd expected prison from the moment he'd decided to tell the truth. The digital recorder had contained enough evidence to dismantle Tony Romano's entire operation, but it had also documented Mac's own complicity in dozens of smaller corruptions over the years. "How long?" he asked. 18 months to 3 years, most likely. White-collar facility, eligible for early release with continued cooperation." Sarah Chen stood to leave, pausing at the door. "Mr. Henderson, my mother would have wanted me to tell you something." Mac looked up at her, this remarkable woman who'd spent months orchestrating an elaborate trap to expose the truth about her mother's death. She always said the measure of a person wasn't their worst moment, but what they did after it, whether they spent their life running from their mistakes or trying to make up for them. Sarah's voice softened slightly. "Thank you for finally choosing to make up for yours." After she left, Mac sat with Jessica in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Pittsburgh through the conference room window. In 18 hours, he would surrender himself to federal marshals. His small investigation firm would close. His carefully constructed life would end. But for the first time in 16 years, Marcus Henderson could look at his reflection without seeing Emily Chen's blood on his hands. The truth was finally free, and so was he.